The main character's name is Mason. He is a student at the Sky Tower Pavilion. He started training here 2 years ago. However, he was only able to reach the 3rd stage of body hardening. Spending 3 years to reach the 3rd stage of body hardening is abnormal, or rather even mediocre. The apprentice brothers who entered the pavilion at the same time as Mason had long since passed that stage and were heading towards their future achievements. Mason had no choice but to do all the dirty work at school while continuing to train. The Heavenly Pavilion is a school with a very distinct feature, which is intense competition between students. Here, power decides everything, take it or be taken from you. This law of the jungle has existed here since ancient times. In the Heavenly Pavilion, if you want to level up, you literally have to climb a ladder made up of your fellows. There is a rule here that students who are not yet 14 years old, regardless of their origin, are sent to a 3-year internship. During these 3 years, everything is paid for by the school and all you have to do is practice. If you can complete the body tempering within these 3 years, you will be taken to a more powerful school with strong masters who will take you as a student. If you are not accepted into an elite school, you can practice on your own. Those who fail the body hardening will be forced to leave the school or become assistant students. The Heavenly Tower Pavilion consists of 3,000 disciples, while you can count the number of student assistants on your fingers, because they now live at their own expense. The main character made his choice, and now he needs to stick to it, because he couldn't just give up and turn away from it. Several students meet Mason on the street. He gets scared and turns around, looking at them. They don't respect Mason. The students say he's just an assistant and is still at level 3 in body hardening. The students challenge Mason to a fight to test his strength, but if he were to fight them all at once, he would definitely not be able to win, so he would choose one opponent. Every battle was a difficult test for him, but refusing to fight was not accepted, so he demonstratively sat down in front of everyone and began to meditate. Any of the students is ready to fight with him, since they are all higher in the level of body hardening. Somewhere nearby, a bell rang. When the bell strikes 9 times and the sun rises in the east, a new day will begin. Each of the students wanted to fight Mason, because even compared to ordinary students, he was weak. By defeating Mason, one could increase one's importance. A fight breaks out between them, each wanting to beat Mason up for fun. He throws his broom into the air and it falls to the ground, pointing to an ordinary student named David, who is now in the 5th stage of body hardening. In the Sky Tower Pavilion, all the disciples are classified into ranks: assistant disciple, ordinary disciple, senior disciple, elite disciple, and core disciple. They stood opposite each other and wished each other a good fight. Mason throws a wide punch, but David easily dodges. He knocks away Mason's punch and lands a powerful blow to his stomach. Pain begins to pierce Mason's body, but it doesn't stop him. Gathering their strength, they both deliver a direct blow. Their fists collide with each other with such force that the ground around them shakes. Mason's punch is faster, but his body is fragile and soft, so he can't withstand the blow and falls to the ground. Although David remained standing, he also felt the blow with his whole body, and light smoke began to flow from his hand. David sees his opponent lying on the ground and believes that victory is his, after which he thanks him for the fight. But Mason doesn't agree with this, and gathering his last strength, gets up. Mason rushes into the attack. He realized that measuring his strength with David will not work, so he wants to knock him down. This isn't the first time David has been in a fight, and he easily dodges Mason's deft kick, after which he again delivers a crushing straight blow to Mason's stomach. Mason's old injuries and David's power take their toll, and Mason falls to the ground again. Mason doesn't want to lose again, and believes the fight isn't over yet. He attacks again and again, each time being repelled by David. David can't believe his eyes. No one has ever tackled him so hard before. It was just a practice fight, but Mason fought as if it was his last time. David began to understand that no matter how many blows he hit Mason, he would not give up and stop the fight. When Mason attacks again, David decides to finish this off and delivers a precise blow to the neck. David knew that from such a precise blow, Mason would simply lose consciousness, which is what happened. The girl sitting in the tree watches what is happening closely. The girl's name was Emily, and her job at the school was to keep records of everything that happened there. Although there were not many such girls in the school, they performed an important function, because every person should know not only their own history, but also the history of what surrounds them. This isn't the first time Emily has taken notes about Mason. It's already 147 times Mason has failed. He had already lost so many times, it was a record number of defeats in the history of the school. All the students dispersed, leaving Mason lying unconscious on the ground. Girls like Emily were forbidden from interfering in normal life and influencing the processes that took place at school, but it was hard for her to watch Mason lying alone and bleeding. A few hours later, Mason woke up under a tree and could not understand how he ended up there, because he had lost consciousness in the fight. But before, no one had taken care of him or moved him from the battlefield. Mason was badly beaten and his body was covered in abrasions and bruises. He felt something in his pocket. His surprise knew no bounds because there was a healing ointment there, which he clearly did not have with him before. Usually people like him were indifferent to everyone, from the students to the school administration. Mason could not believe that someone was helping him. The medicine could be purchased for 10 achievement points, but even with a month of dirty work, Mason could not afford it. A few minutes later, Mason was able to leisurely walk to his house. He took off his dirty clothes, which were completely sewn up. The beatings were all over his body. Mason decided not to delay and quickly apply the ointment given to him because it had not only healing but also magical properties. With its help, one can recover very quickly. Mason was completely covered in ointment, after which he got dressed again and went to bed because after a serious fight, he had almost no strength left. When he fell asleep, even in his dreams, he was haunted by the impressions of the battle that had taken place. In his dream, he faced David in battle again. Now he knows how to move and act. He quickly defeats David and thinks that now no one can defeat him again. Suddenly, a bright light wakes Mason up, causing him to wake up in fear. He was so deep in sleep that he even began to confuse it with reality. But it was just a hole in the roof that Mason had been meaning to patch for a long time. He makes the bed and suddenly finds a piece of stone that looks like a box. Mason can't remember where he got it from or why he's lying in bed. Suddenly, a piece of stone rises from his hands and opens up like a book in purple. After this, it immediately falls to the floor. Mason picks up the book in surprise, but there is nothing written on its pages. He remembered finding it while hunting in the mountains and would never have thought that it was actually a book. After flipping through a few pages, Mason thought that this book was of no use, but suddenly an inscription appeared on the page. With a suitable vessel, a golden body will descend. This is not a miracle, but a golden immortal. Mason abruptly closes the book. These words frighten him. But still, interest overcomes fear. And he opens the book again, and the inscription appears on the pages again. With a suitable vessel, a golden body will descend. This is not a miracle, but a golden immortal, a majestic golden body. The rules are not to be broken. May the indomitable spirit descend. Mason doesn't understand what all this means, but he wants to continue reading. He bites his finger and drips a drop of his blood onto the pages of the book. A golden glow suddenly appears above the book. From a small beam of light appears a skeleton sitting in the lotus position with a smile on his face. Mason doesn't like this. He thinks the skeleton is just laughing at him. He tries to push him, but at the same time a skeleton enters him. The sound of bones crunching is heard and Mason falls to the ground in pain and loses consciousness. A few hours later, Mason comes to his senses, but at first he doesn't understand what happened to him. There are no more wounds on his body, no pain, and his bones have become much stronger. He remembers the book and immediately starts looking for it. Just as he thought about her, she appears behind him and falls to the floor. Mason picks it up and says, "Disappear," the book disappears. He says, "Appear," and the book disappears. Mason realizes that it is made of spirit stone, and only when hundreds of millions of spirits gather together in the abyss will such a book be created. He realizes that with such a treasure, he will be able to crush not only high-level disciples, but also almost any martial arts expert in this world. Mason is now very weak, and only through constant training will he be able to protect this book and gain experience to withstand any force. There are still many pages in this book, and more than one treasure is hidden, so he sits down on the bed and opens a new page of the book. An inscription appears, a majestic golden body of a record of the body's hardening. A golden glow appears above Mason and flows into his mind. Mason understands when and how to properly practice his strokes, and how much time he needs to achieve the best results in this. Mason looked up and saw that while he had been thinking about training, it had become deep into the night. Without even making his bed, he goes to bed covering his face with an open book. Just as the first rays of the sun began to illuminate the house, Mason wakes up. He goes outside and waits for the right time to start training. As soon as he felt that the time had come, he immediately took a fighting stance. After completing a few training exercises, his body is again pierced by pain. Now his bones perceive the load in a completely different way. He is gradually approaching the next level of body hardening. But 3 exercises are not even 1% of the entire workout. Overcoming the pain, Mason gets up again and continues despite everything. 30 minutes of training had passed, leaving him very tired. But immediately at the end of the training, Mason feels changes and understands that he has moved on to the 4th stage of body hardening. He is surprised, because it took him 3 years to reach the 3rd stage, and now it only took him half an hour. Suddenly he starts to feel nauseous. Impurities come out of his body. Mason had experienced this before, but he had never encountered such a volume. Even though Mason had entered a new phase of body conditioning, he still had a lot of new things to learn. While he hadn't even grasped 1% of the entire technique yet, he couldn't even imagine what would happen if he fully mastered it. Fully confident in his abilities, Mason takes a broom from his house and goes out into the yard, because no one has removed him from his daily duties. Emily is watching him from the tree again. Mason calmly sweeps the schoolyard. Students come up to him and ask if everything is okay with him. Mason thinks about how he still has to sweep the yard, even though he has made progress in strengthening his body. Mason turns sharply, and the brother apprentice falls, not expecting such a sharp turn. Brother disciple gets up and starts running. Mason asks him where he is running off to which the student replies that today is the 8th day of the month. On the 8th day of every month, all of the students' achievement points are added up, resulting in rewards and possibly even a promotion in rank. At the beginning of the month, Mason had 10 achievement points, but he was challenged to a duel 6 times and always lost, so he only had 4 achievement points left. No matter how upset he was about it, scoring is a mandatory procedure that cannot be avoided. A few minutes later, Mason arrived at the Hall of Fame. An old schoolmaster sat at the table. Mason knew perfectly well that his thoughts were connected with the pavilion students. The old man's name was Tong. Mason woke him up, and the old man only saw Mason and asked why he hadn't come in the morning. Mason said his mundane duties of cleaning the school grounds are so consuming that sometimes he forgets about everything else. Tong takes his notebook and begins to summarize. Thanks to the girls recording the history, he knows all about Mason's merits this month. A few minutes later, Tong throws 10 pieces of silver on the table with his calculations. While Mason is putting together the money he has honestly earned this month, Tong announces that he has 12 points for which he can buy a bottle of wound healing. But Mason refuses, because he has long wanted to save up for a tablet of the essence of hardening. However, the old man laughs at him, because he knows very well that the pain from constant defeats only leads to torture of his body. Tong jokes and says that he would rather die than have Mason save up for a body-tempering essence pill. Mason doesn't like the old man's pessimistic attitude because he really hopes for this pill, which can speed up his subsequent transitions to other stages of body hardening. The old man said that he would be able to sell him the pill personally when he had enough merit points, but he also said that no student had ever earned that much in his entire life. Mason is confident that he will be able to accumulate points because his character is not like the other students, and if he decides to do something, he will eventually achieve his goal. But the old man laughs at him again, reminding him that just yesterday he was defeated again by another simple student. Mason truly understands that he cannot match the level of body hardening of many students, and the old man's words are indeed based on his performance. So Mason turns around and leaves, confident that he can prove to the old man that he is worthy of this pill and respect. The old man tries to stop him so that he would talk to him, but Mason understands that the old man is only happy about his defeats and does not want to talk to him. Tong says that the heavenly pavilion is not for him, and he should return home. Mason listened to the old man for a second and quietly said that he had nowhere to return to. After talking with the old man, Mason headed to Black Plum Village. Mason walked through the streets of the village and thought about the conversation he had with Tong. Every time he walks in this village, he feels a little uneasy and uncomfortable. But today, these feelings are not there. On the way, Mason comes across a group of young guys who are actively discussing something. He looked closely at the group of boys, and it seemed to him that there was a school student standing among them. Mason simply passes by, although the presence of a student among the bandits clearly arouses suspicion. A few minutes later, Mason comes to Aunt Olivia's shop. Mason goes into the shops and, as usual, asks to sell him a bag of rice. Here he is a regular customer, and his aunt, as usual, is worried that Mason might not have enough rice in one bag for the whole month. Although a bag of rice was not always enough for Mason to last a whole month, his finances did not allow him to buy more. At this point, the aunt's husband, named Paul, says that they can give him the spoiled rice from the basement for free. This family was always kind to him, and whenever they gave him spoiled rice, he was no different from the good one. Mason objectively understood that they just wanted to give him some rice for free because they were a kind family. He felt uncomfortable and tried his best to refuse it. But Olivia insists. She continues to insist that a lot of the rice has been eaten by insects, and now it cannot be sold, and they will gladly give it to Mason. Mason didn't know what to say anymore, and simply thanked Olivia and her husband for their concern. At this moment, 2 guys enter the house and are met by the store assistant. One of the guys pushes him, and the assistant falls to the floor. The guy loudly and rudely calls the store manager. Uncle Paul quickly approaches them and asks what happened. The guy asks again who is in charge here. Uncle Paul politely replied that he was the store manager. The guy says that his brother, whom he brought with him, was sold poisoned rice here. Paul is shocked. This can't be. His store only sells fresh rice. But the guy continues to blame him and says that Paul is to blame for this, and they are demanding compensation. Mason looked at the boys who had arrived for a long time and remembered how he had seen them on the street in good health. He went up to Uncle Paul and whispered that these guys were swindlers and that there was no point in making concessions to them. Uncle Paul doubts that all this was made up just to get some money out of him. Mason asks him to take his word for it. Uncle Paul turns to the boys and politely replies that he will not provide them with any compensation. The guy can't believe Paul's courage. Uncle says that the only thing he can do for them is call a doctor and pay for the treatment. The guy says he won't leave here until he gets compensation, and if not, then everyone will find out that his uncle is selling expired products. The uncle didn't want any negative rumors to circulate about his store, and was a little scared by the guy's words. At this moment, a disciple of the Heavenly Pavilion enters the store. Mason turns around and realizes that he was the one talking to these guys when he accidentally saw them on the street. The bandits exchanged glances with the student and waited for something. One of the bandits asked who he was and why he came here. The student said his name was John and he wanted justice. He considered them to be common swindlers, and he believed that they should be punished for their actions. Mason is confused because just recently they were clearly on the same page. Has the school student really chosen the noble, correct path, or is he simply playing a double game? One of the guys says that it's a lie and his brother was actually poisoned. He can hardly move because of it. John says it can be easily aired out. Immediately after this, he tries to hit his exhausted brother, but he immediately dodges his blow. Jones says his punch was fast enough that a weakened, sick man would hardly have been able to dodge it so quickly. The people gathered around begin to realize that these were indeed scammers who were trying to deceive Uncle Paul. Mason still doesn't believe John and wonders what he's really up to, since they obviously know each other and this is just a cunning plan. John orders them to get out of here and never show up again. The scammers say they admit their defeat to John and apologize for the misunderstanding. John appears to be a real hero in the eyes of those around him. Just as the scammers were about to leave the store, Mason stopped them. He says that this cannot be forgiven and they must be properly punished. Those around him agree with him, because if they are not taught a lesson, they will continue their dirty games. Mason suggests that John and I beat up the scammers together, because they deserve it. John is confused. He didn't expect such a turn of events. Mason insists, because John, as a hero, should be the first to punish the swindlers. John doesn't know what to do, because this wasn't part of his plans at all. The situation is getting tense. The people around them can't stand it and start beating up the scammers themselves. John looks at this with horror but does not intervene in the fight. A few minutes later, the beaten scammers are lying on the ground. One of them asks John for help, but John immediately says that he is not going to help the scammers in order to divert all suspicion from himself. Mason wants to expose John's dastardly plan and suggests executing the swindlers, asking if anyone has any objections. John says they've had enough and maybe they should stop. But Mason disagrees, because their actions deserve it. Mason asks if John has another reason not to kill the scammers. John does not reveal himself and says that he has seen death more than once. Then Mason says that it would be right to kill John, because it was he who revealed their vile plan, and then he will punish them. At this point, one of the scammers stands up and accuses John of lying, because it was he who made them do this. He forced them because he wanted to win the favor of Uncle Paul's daughter. John tries to talk his way out of it, but the scammers insist that he was the one who made it all up. The swindlers said they were starving, and John offered them 50 pieces of silver for it. Now everyone around realized who the real fraudster was. No one can do anything to him, since he is from the Heavenly Pavilion. John is disgraced, and he realizes it's because of Mason. As he leaves the shop, John threatens Mason and says that they will meet again. Uncle Paul thanks Mason, but is worried that this might get him into trouble. Mason is not afraid of John because he is a bad person, and Mason is ready to fight for the truth. After this, Mason, satisfied that the truth has triumphed, leaves the shop and says goodbye to everyone. Coming home, Mason is confident that he won't have to worry about food for the next month. While in the house, Mason thought that John would be waiting for him on the way to the house and would attack him unexpectedly. But Mason remembered that according to the rules of the pavilion, killing or causing harm without cause was strictly prohibited, which is why John did not wait for him. Mason is sure that they will meet again. John is a bad person and will clearly seek revenge. Mason must begin training immediately. Otherwise, at best, he will simply be beaten. But for such an insult, he could also be killed. Morning comes and Mason is training. Since the moment the golden skeleton entered him, his body constantly aches. He is confused. He does not know what to choose in order to be more effective. Either increase your workout time by another half hour or leave time for sleep. Mason is taking a bath and thinking about what to do. Lying in his bed, Mason remembers the book. He takes it in his hands and begins to leaf through it. Suddenly, a vessel appears from the book. According to what I read in the book, this vessel can help Mason in his practice. This vessel transforms rare herbs into empowering incense. Mason understands that at this stage of body hardening, the trefoil flower or the dead plant will be suitable for him. They will definitely help him improve his body. Mason knows that these plants are in the deposit room, and the price for these plants is certainly low. But right now, he doesn't have enough points. Mason is left hoping only for luck in the mountains. Mason goes to bed full of confidence to go to the mountains tomorrow. At dawn, Mason practices body conditioning techniques. after which he goes to the Hall of Fame, where he works hard. For his work, the depraved old man gives him a book describing medicinal herbs. This book describes not only the properties of medicinal herbs, but also their approximate location. At noon, Mason roundaboutly writes out a document that allows him to have 3 days off from school. After this, Mason sets off on his journey. A few hours later, he is already approaching the mountain range. Mason collects herbs, although it is not as easy as it seems. After collecting some herbs, he moves on. On the way, Mason discovers the dead plant. He double-checks in the book, and it is definitely dead grass. Mason collects it in his bag. It was getting dark, and Mason decided to make a stop. After eating, he climbs a tree and falls asleep. At dawn, Mason is training again. Mason bites into his last rice pancake. After this, he can go further in search of herbs. Mason originally planned to go hunting, but he didn't even see a rabbit all day, so he thinks he should have brought more rice cakes. The village is far from him, and Mason wonders where he can find food. In the distance, he sees smoke. Mason thinks that whoever made a fire in the middle of the mountains is either a fool or does not know fear. After walking for a few minutes, Mason finds a fire. There was no one near the fire, but when he came closer, a boy and an adult man from the trap aimed bows at Mason. He says he was just walking around collecting herbs and apologizes for bothering you. They lower their weapons and invite him to the fire. The man's name is Liam. He comes from a village at the foot of the mountains. They come here to hunt, thereby providing food for the whole village. Mason introduces himself and says that he is from the Sky Pavilion. Liam is delighted, because being a disciple of the Heavenly Pavilion is a great achievement. The boy also dreams of becoming a disciple of the Heavenly Pavilion. Mason approaches the boy and says that in order to become a student, it is not necessary to be very talented, but the main thing is to apply strength and work. The boy is glad to hear this and hands Mason a piece of bread. But Mason understands that food is worth its weight in gold in the mountains, and he worries that they won't have enough food for themselves. But Liam sees that Mason hasn't eaten anything for a long time and insists on his own. Mason is immensely grateful to them for their kindness and concern. After dinner, they go to bed. Morning comes. Mason starts training again, when suddenly he feels his body filling with new strength. The 5th stage of hardening. Mason practices this body hardening technique for only a couple of days, and gets such a great result. It's unimaginable. Mason is very happy about it. He finishes training and continues his journey in search of herbs. Further down the road, Mason catches a rabbit. Mason has already walked 30 miles, and he understands that if he goes further, he may encounter dangerous animals that could very well tear him to pieces. Suddenly, Mason hears a scream. He runs towards the sound and sees a cave with a bow lying near it. He throws down his bag and goes into a cave overgrown with cobwebs. There are cocoons filled with skeletons in the cave. Suddenly, he sees Liam in the cocoon. Mason approaches him and checks his breathing. Liam woke up and said that the boy was carried away by a spider. Mason immediately began to tear apart the web, but it was very sticky. He could not waste time. He tells Liam to continue freeing himself while he goes to save the boy. Going further into the cave, he sees a huge spider spinning its threads near the boy. The spider bites the boy. Mason lunges at the spider and hits it with all his might. The spider turns around and throws Mason to the ground. Mason strikes again. The risk of being poisoned is very high, even though this huge spider is equal in strength to Mason. If Mason doesn't hurry, the boy may die. The spider shoots a thread at Mason. Mason dodges, but the spider simply sealed the exit with its web so that Mason had nowhere to run. Mason strikes again, but at that moment the spider wounds his hand. After several blows, the spider begins to squeal. The spider doesn't give up and Mason attacks him again. After the most difficult few minutes of Mason's life, the spider falls lifeless to the ground. The spider is dead, even though it's just an animal. It was difficult for Mason to defeat it. Mason takes a fragment of a spider's leg from his hand. He picks up the boy and carries him out of the cave. They are met by a now freed Liam. Mason says the boy has lost a lot of blood and is unconscious, but he knows how to give him first aid. Mason takes out some medicinal herbs from his backpack. He chews medicinal herbs and applies them to the boy's wounds. This should counteract the poison. The boy comes to, but he still feels bad. Mason says the boy needs to be taken to a doctor. Despite his wounds, Mason feels perfectly fine. Mason takes his bag and asks to wait for him. He heads inside the cave. He finds a trefoil, a flower that grows in damp, dark places, where there are many corpses that stimulate its growth. Going further, he finds a mushroom that he did not see in the old man's book. He decided to take it and show it to the old man. Mason leaves the cave and, together with Liam and his son, heads to the healer. After some time, they come to the doctor. Liam asks the doctor what's wrong with his son, but the doctor simply sends him outside and asks him not to interfere. Liam tells Mason with hope and joy that the healer will be able to cure the boy. Liam falls to his knees and thanks Mason for his help and generosity. Mason is modest and says that he helped as much as he could, especially since they were kind to him the day before. Liam is very grateful to Mason and says he will never forget his generosity. The doctor came out of the house and said that the boy was fine. He would be healthy, but due to the large loss of blood he would not yet regain consciousness. Liam is happy and thanks the doctor for his work. Something is happening nearby and it catches Mason's attention. At the same time, several students are discussing Mason's disappearance from the Sky Pavilion, but they cannot believe that he has left the school forever. John overhears the conversation and interrupts, not wanting to hear about Mason. The noise nearby attracts him too. Approaching a group of students, John is informed that today any student can challenge Mason, but no one can find him. John likes this idea. He knows very well that Mason always loses in such fights. Although John feels sorry for Mason, this pity is not enough for him to forgive him. John made it his goal to expel Mason from school at any cost. One of John's henchmen approaches the other students and announces that John wants to fight Mason today. However, the students know that Mason always chooses his opponent himself with his broom, and they have no idea who John is. John's henchman tells them that John's sister is one of the strongest disciples in the Heavenly Pavilion, and it is best not to mess with her. Then the students agree to go and watch the fight. 10 minutes later, they approach the square and wait until Mason begins sweeping the square as usual. But Mason is not in the square. John's henchman offers him to go to his hut, to which he agrees, and all the students follow them. When John approached Mason's hut, he grinned, as the house was wooden and dilapidated. John stands at the entrance and shouts loudly, challenging Mason to a fight. But no one leaves the house. John says that if Mason doesn't come out, he will make him do it himself. John can't take it anymore and kicks down the door with one kick. John's henchman enters the house, but no one is there. They think Mason has run away, as he hasn't been seen for several days. But John is filled with hatred for him, and he doesn't want to leave there just like that. John orders a torch to be brought to him. He wants to burn down Mason's house. John's henchman is scared and asks him again, hinting that this is too cruel. John is angry and reassures his henchmen that they will later say that the house caught fire on its own because of the dry straw on the roof. A torch is brought to John and he approaches the house to light it. But suddenly someone's hand stops him. Mason asks him why he is doing this. John was confused. He didn't expect to see Mason here. John says that he has not forgotten about that incident, and Mason will be punished for his insolence. Jason asks if John wants to challenge him. Mason's things were tattered and he was bloodied from the fight with the spider, but he was ready to fight right now. John is ready to fight, but Mason turns around and calmly walks into his house. All the students froze in anticipation. Mason calmly put down the bag of herbs and headed back outside. John says that he is willing to forgive Mason if he kneels before him and begs for forgiveness. Mason shakes his head in denial. He knows that John has serious connections at the school. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared to burn down his house. John brags about his brother and sister, who are top students and can beat Mason with one finger. Mason realizes that he is much better than John, puts his hand on his shoulder, and says that no one will help him if he loses to him in a fair fight. John knocks his hand away and doesn't want to hear anything about it. But Mason continues and says that if he had told the elders about John's actions, he would have been kicked out long ago. John insists on an apology and doesn't want to hear Mason's pathetic excuses. Since words didn't convince John, Mason, without thinking twice, offered him a duel. John is afraid of Mason's determination and reminds him that he has no right to challenge a student with the 7th level of body hardening. At this moment, one of the students emerges from the crowd. The student's name is Peter. He says that his body tempering level is only 5, but he can handle Mason without any problems. Mason is well aware that his body conditioning level is also 5th, but no one knows about it, and now he is confident of his victory. Peter says that Mason can hit him 3 times, and if even one of them lands, then he will admit defeat. But if not, then he will beat Mason until she loses consciousness. Emily, sitting as usual in a tree, watches what is happening. Mason agrees with Peter's proposal, and immediately begins the attack. Mason delivers one powerful blow to Peter's chest, after which he immediately kicks Peter, who is flying from the blow, to the ground. Peter falls to the ground at great speed, lifeless. John, like all the other students, cannot believe it, because it is simply impossible to defeat a 5th-level student so quickly. The girl also can't believe her eyes, because just a few days ago Mason lost to a student with a 4th level of body tempering, and now he won in just 2 hits. Mason himself is a little surprised by his new power. He cannot fully control it. John says it's impossible and Mason is cheating, but Mason says that John himself can test his strength in battle. One of the henchmen told John that he was taking a big risk and that he shouldn't fight Mason right away, since they didn't know his real strength. John accuses Mason of hiding his real powers. Not knowing the level of Mason's body hardening, John does not want to fight him and leaves with the other students, saying that today he will spare Mason. Because of this brawl, Mason remembers that he missed his morning practice. This upsets him, but now he needs to take care of other things. Mason heads to the lake for a swim. The girl came down from the tree to ask Mason what stage of body hardening he was at, since she needed to document this fact. But when she gets to the lake, she sees Mason completely naked. She doesn't leave. A natural interest awakens in her, and hiding behind a tree, she continues to watch as Mason enters the water. Mason has been on the road for several days and many people have tried to kill him, so he carefully washes off dried blood and dirt. A few minutes later, Mason emerges from the water, unaware that Emily is watching him. Once Mason was dressed, he headed to his house where he picked up a broom. It's been a few days since the last cleaning and he needs to return to his duties. He remembers the bag of herbs. Having put aside the ones he needed for himself, he decided to go to the old man to sell the remaining herbs. In the Hall of Fame, an old man is drinking tea. When Mason entered the hall, the old man choked because Mason had been beaten and his clothes were torn. Mason does not admit to the old man what happened to him and begins to lay out from his bag the herbs that he managed to collect. But these were ordinary medicinal herbs that can be collected almost anywhere. The old man offers Mason only 1 merit point for them. This upsets Mason because he went through a lot to get them. Then he decides to play his trump card. Mason takes a mushroom he picked from the spider's cave out of his bag. The old man is surprised. He hasn't seen this mushroom for a long time. The old man asks Mason where he got it from, and if he knows what kind of mushroom it is. After this, Mason tells how he had to defeat a huge spider to get it. The old man understands that Mason tried very hard and was even able to defeat a wild beast, which deserves praise. After examining the mushroom again, the old man says that it is a rare blood mushroom. The old man is ready to give Mason 20 points for this mushroom, but Mason is upset. He wanted more. Mason calculated that he now had only 48 contribution points, but he still needs some herbs. He wants to buy 10 pieces of dead grass from the old man. The old man says it will cost 10 contribution points, but Mason doesn't understand that when he brings this herb for sale, 2 herbs cost 1 contribution point, and the purchase price has doubled. The old man explains to him that there is a huge difference between buying and selling. Mason accuses the old man of simply making money off of him, but the old man says that he has nothing to do with it, and that the price is set by his superiors. Mason is upset and slams his fists on the table, but he still needs the grass and he agrees to the old man's offer because he has no choice. Leaving the deposit hall, Mason sees a girl who is constantly watching him, but without paying attention to her, he goes home. While at home, Mason brews herbs in a vessel given to him by the book. The smell is strange, but nothing special happens. Mason carries the vessel to the bed, but numbness grips his entire body. Mason falls to the floor before reaching the bed. He doesn't have the strength to take even a few steps. The herbs he brewed are slightly poisonous and can cause paralysis of the body. Mason lies on the floor, but he understands that these herbs are only effective under maximum loads. Gathering all his will into a fist, Mason gets up, and he feels how his body is filled with strength and he feels better. Mason understands that only steel will and perseverance can stimulate the body at a critical moment. This vessel really helps, but 1 portion of herbs only lasts for an hour, and Mason must conserve the herbs he collects. Night is falling outside. Lying in bed, Mason thinks about how he can earn more contribution points and falls asleep. At the same time, John is not sleeping and thinking about how to take revenge for the humiliation. He wakes up his minions to come up with a plan for revenge. John demands that they come up with a plan. One of John's henchmen says he has a great idea for revenge. His name is Eaton, and he comes up to John and quietly whispers a cunning plan in his ear. John is glad to hear this. He puts his hand on his shoulder and nods approvingly. Morning came. Mason is sweeping the street. He wants to finish as soon as possible so he can get back to training. John's henchman approaches him, but Mason doesn't know about it yet and doesn't pay attention to him. Eaton approaches Mason, introduces himself, and says he has important business to attend to. Eaton starts the conversation and admires Mason for his victory over Peter yesterday. Mason thought Ethan and Peter had had problems before. Eaton says Peter bullied him and wants to get even with him, but he has strong connections within the pavilion and cannot provoke him. Mason thought so because he was in a similar situation. Ethan thanks Mason for defeating Peter and proving to everyone that he is not as weak as everyone says. Mason is modest and says that he still has a lot of work ahead of him and thinks that if he hadn't defeated Peter yesterday, everyone would have continued to consider him a weakling. Peter says he wants to learn Mason's fighting techniques. Mason is confused, and after thinking for a few seconds, he says that he will not train Eaton, since he does not exchange blows unless absolutely necessary. Eaton begins to beg Mason to train him because if he does not agree, his plan will fail. But Mason refuses Eaton again. Eaton tries to hurt Mason with words and says that if he loses to him, he will compensate him for the contribution points. Mason finally agrees to the fight, but says that he can't do it now because he was recently challenged, and too little time has passed since then. But Eaton corrects him because Mason can challenge him himself. Mason simply forgot about it because during his entire training he never challenged anyone. Mason is very worried about losing his contribution points and asks him again if he will really share his points if he loses. To which Eaton confidently replies that Mason need not worry about it. Suddenly Eaton turns around and starts running, saying that he will be right back. Mason doesn't understand him because he wanted to have a duel with him. Mason doesn't understand why Eaton needs this. Meanwhile, John's henchman reports to him that Mason asked Eaton for a dozen herbs for the sparring. But John thinks it's no big loss to teach Mason a lesson. At this time, Eaton bought a dozen herbs from the old man and runs to Mason. Running up to him, he hands him a bag of herbs and says that there are exactly 10 of them, and he can count them. Mason, not seeing the need, places the bag of herbs and his broom on the ground and says that they can start the fight at any time. They bowed to each other and the fight began. Eaton immediately began to attack, but Mason easily parried his direct punch. Eaton was surprised. He felt the impact of the blow as if he had hit a large boulder. Another attack, but Mason deflects it again. Eaton can't believe his eyes. Mason starts attacking, and after just 2 punches, Eaton falls to the ground, begging Mason to stop. Mason calmly walks up to him and helps him up. John watched their fight. John tells his henchman that Eaton is now at the 7th stage of body hardening, and he simply could not lose to Mason, who is at the 4th stage. Mason saw them and quickly moved towards them. Taking John by the shoulder, he says with a smile that he can fight him any time. Jonah asks him how he knew about their plan, to which Mason replies that he saw Eaton in the crowd yesterday and realized that he, too, is one of John's henchmen. After this short conversation, Mason reminds John that he can fight him anytime and goes home. Several days passed. Mason meditates in a field. His body is filled with strength again. He is impressed. Finally progress. Now he is at the 7th stage of body hardening. Soon he will be able to seriously begin studying martial techniques. On the 4th page of the book there is a description of martial arts. After reading the 4th page, Mason thinks the movement pattern is a bit odd. Yang strengthening technique is a practice that involves strengthening your own yang energy. The whole point of this technique is that you should train with excess yang energy. But there are also limits. If the liquid yang energy becomes overflowing, there is a possibility of damaging your meridians. But there is also a huge plus. During battle, you can use this energy to increase the effectiveness of your attacks. Several days passed. By practicing in the open sun all day, the yang energy increased only by a tiny bit. But the sun is the best source of energy for Mason now. After several hours of training, Mason finally completed the 1st stage of forming a true energy source. After several hours of traveling, Mason came to a huge crevice in the ground. This is the Coiling Dragon prison, and it is full of yang energy. This is the forbidden place in the entire heavenly pavilion. It is swept by strong winds, and disciples who have committed unforgivable acts are sent here. Mason doesn't understand why yang energy has gathered in this particular place. There is no doubt that the yang energy in this place is simply beyond imagination. When Mason sat down to meditate, he felt the yang energy filling his body. An elder approached Mason from behind. Mason stood up abruptly and greeted him. He thought that the elder had a high status in the pavilion, but he rarely saw elders and did not know what position he occupied. Mason says he doesn't know how to address the elder. He answers that his name is the 11th elder, but Mason had never heard of him, yet he greets him again. The elder immediately realized that Mason was practicing martial arts based on yang energy. Mason confirmed this, as there was a huge concentration of this energy in this place, and it would be foolish to deny it. Mason asked the elder why there is so much yang energy in this place, to which the elder replies that the answer lies deep within the rift, where there is a treasure that emits this energy. It was an obvious answer, but Mason didn't understand what kind of treasure was there. The elder explains that the writhing dragon prison was created by a sword strike. Mason was amazed. Because the crack was more than 100 feet wide, could it really have been formed by a sword strike? Hundreds of years ago, there was no heavenly pavilion at this site. When the founder crossed these lands, he encountered a powerful demon. In the fierce battle, the demon was forced to flee, cutting the ground with his sword, thereby creating an escape route. And so the chase began. It took a lot of effort on the part of the founder to finally catch up with and defeat the demon. The demon's power was unimaginable. Even though it's now dead, no one can say for sure that there isn't another such demon in this world. The founder decided to guard the rift containing the demon's head for a while establishing a heavenly pavilion. Darkness rules this place, so the sun's rays cannot reach the bottom. After the founder died, this place became a prison for the worst students. Mason doesn't understand why the elder came here. The 11th elder came here because he wanted to find one person. Although the elder was old, he still loved to chat. But for now, he decided to leave their conversation with Mason and left, leaving many of Mason's questions unanswered. Since there was a yang treasure here, Mason decided to practice here for a while. Several days passed, and Mason meditated on the very edge of the rift. He felt the first drop of liquid yang in his body and was simply delighted with these sensations. Mason thought that although it took several days of sitting in the scorching sun, it was worth it. Mason came home already at night. The door to his house was open, even though he always closed it, which alerted Mason. Entering his house, he saw the girl who had so often watched him sleeping on his bed. The hole in the roof, which Mason had not repaired, let the moonlight through and illuminated the lying girl. Mason was already standing almost close to the bed and admiring the girl. Suddenly she woke up. There was an awkward silence between them. Mason cleared his throat and asked the girl how he could address her. He was a little shy and worried that he had asked the wrong question. She shyly replied that her name was Emily. Mason asked how he could help her. Emily said that a hunter from the North Wind Mountains had been sitting outside Mason's house all day. He waited for Mason all day because he wanted to thank him for his kindness and help, but Mason never showed up. Mason immediately realized it was Liam, and the girl handed Mason the bag. Emily began to make excuses to Mason. She fell asleep on his bed only because she herself could not wait for him. Mason shyly promised that next time he wouldn't keep me waiting so long. They smiled at each other, and the girl left shyly. Mason continued to smile from meeting the shy girl and from the gift given by the hunter, and soon went to bed. Mason was awakened in the morning by a knock on the door. Opening the door, he saw a letter lying on the ground, left by the fleeing Eaton. Mason smiled and began to read it. The letter said that Eaton would be waiting for Mason to talk in the depths of the Black Winds forest. Mason knew perfectly well that an ambush was definitely waiting for him in the forest, but at the same time he wanted to test the effect of developing the Yang technique. Eaton runs to John and tells him that he delivered the letter, and they can prepare for Mason's arrival. Suddenly, students from the Thunderstorm School begin to approach them. Eaton got scared and asked John if they should wait for their arrival since there were constant conflicts between them. But John had already had many run-ins with them, and leaving would be humiliating. At the same time, the students of the Thunderstorm School are discussing how it would be nice to get even with John. Lucas, a student at the Thunderstorm School, approaches John and asks him with a smirk how dare he get in his way. A girl approaches Lucas and says that John is being disrespectful. The girl's name is Sansa. She is from the Bull School, and she is very attractive, and John has been eyeing her for a long time. But John is not going to leave, and says that there is a lot of free space around him, hinting that the students of the Thunderstorm School can get around him. Lucas tries to humiliate and drive away John with words, but he does not give in. No one will give in, so as not to fall in Sansa's eyes, and she takes advantage of this and tries to provoke a fight. It becomes clear that this is inevitable. Lucas strikes first. John parries it, but one blow tears his clothes. He is overwhelmed by Lucas's strength. John realizes that Lucas has reached the Kai Yuan stage. They started practicing on the same day, but Lucas has clearly achieved more. In a fight, he simply taunts John. Meanwhile, Mason approaches the designated location and hears the sounds of battle. Coming closer, Mason sees Lucas beating John. The beating reminded Mason of most of his battles. Sansa turns to Lucas, saying that John is showing resilience and asks Lucas to leave him alone. But John doesn't think about giving up and says that if Lucas doesn't kill him today, he may no longer have hope for a peaceful life. John's henchmen try to save him, but they are stopped by Lucas's men and prevented from intervening in the fight. Lucas takes the stone and is about to deliver the finishing blow, but Mason stops his hand. Lucas doesn't know Mason and thinks he can beat him without any problem. Mason is attacked by several opponents at once, but he easily repels their attacks and hits one after another. Sansa notices that Mason is using life force in battle, which impresses her greatly. John doesn't understand why Mason is fighting on his side because they are enemies. There is only one opponent left, and that is Lucas. Lucas takes out his sword and says that Mason brought this on himself and he doesn't have to beg him for mercy. John warns Mason that Lucas has already reached the Kai Yuan stage. Mason blocks Lucas's sword, though it pierces his wrist. But Mason feels almost no pain and with one blow knocks out several of Lucas's teeth, causing him to fall to the ground. Mason turns to Sansa and says it's her turn. She gets scared and Mason grabs her by the throat with his bloody hand. But Sansa immediately says that she is not with them. She is from the School of the Bull, and has never raised her hand against the students of the Heavenly Tower. She flatters Mason and says that he is strong, after which, licking her finger, she asks if Mason is strong in bed. Mason lets her go, embarrassed by her words. He lowers his hand to her chest, slows down for a second, but thinks that he also needs to teach her a lesson, and gently pushes her to the ground. After which he turns around and says goodbye to her with a smile. Sansa is amazed. She believes that she can win the heart of any guy, but she does not understand what is happening to Mason. She runs up to him, grabs him by the shoulder, and says that he, Mason, is an interesting guy, turns around and leaves. Mason approaches John and asks him if he can go. John nods to him and walks with him. They came to the Heavenly Pavilion. In these areas, clashes between students are not uncommon, and everyone has become accustomed to it. Unless the fight ends in death or serious injury, the elders pay no attention to them. Mason came home. He thought about how he needed to take care of his bones and muscles, because if he broke something, the medicinal herbs would cost him a lot. The effect of the Yang strengthening technique allows Mason to recover from minor injuries. Suddenly, Mason felt a surge of strength in his body again. He realized that he had already reached the 8th stage of body hardening. Today's battle had clearly benefited him. The rate of absorption of Yang energy has increased significantly. A few days later, Mason is back to his usual duties, sweeping the yard. In the distance, he saw John approaching him. He had hardly appeared in public for the last few days, and was most likely recovering from the battle. John walked up to Mason. He asked him how he felt. Without answering, John took out 2 glasses of alcohol and gave one to Mason. With the words, "Let's drink," they empty the vessels together. A student in glasses comes up to them from behind and tells them that drinking alcohol in public is a serious offense, and he will deduct 5 points from each of them. But Mason took it calmly and hardly paid any attention. John orders his henchmen to help Mason sweep the yard, but he tries to refuse the help. John says that cleaning can wait and they need to talk. They walk towards the lake and John asks why Mason saved him back then. Mason thought for a moment and replied that no matter what happened between them, they were still brothers, and he did what he had to do. John was surprised. He would not help Mason in such a situation. He asked him to forget the past and recognizes him as an older brother. John shyly asks Mason if he touched Sansa. Mason replies that she leaned on his arm herself, and he only wanted to teach her a lesson. "How was it?" John asked. Mason laughingly asked John if he had ever experienced anything similar. John is surprised and cannot believe that Mason has already had intimacy with a girl. Mason laughs and wants to end this conversation. They sat down by the river near Mason's house, several of the younger brothers patching up a hole in the roof of the house. John warns his older brother that he should be careful with Sansa because she is a very proud girl. The older brother does not understand what she wants from him. John insists that, for now, Sansa will use any means necessary to get her older brother, and in this regard, her older brother is incredibly lucky. But Mason doesn't respect this type of girl, and doesn't feel any emotions towards Sansa, and again asks John to change the subject. John wanted to thank his older brother. John takes a white vial out of his pocket and says that the granules inside will be able to heal wounds and restore chi energy. Mason takes the vial and finds that it will be very useful to him in the upcoming fights. John doesn't like to remain in debt, so he offers to show his older brother a place. The next day they walk together in the Forest of Black Winds. John asks his older brother if he knows why it was in this forest that they met Lucas and his men. Mason doesn't know for sure, but he assumes they had some business here. John laughs and says that the Blackwind Forest is the same distance from the Sky Tower, Thunderhouse, and the Crimson Clan, and there is an underground market in this forest. At the market, students can earn silver or gold for their skills or information, and it is very popular among students. Eaton says you can buy a few fruits and various medicinal herbs here for a ridiculous price. Mason asks John if there is an 11th step elder in the Sky Tower Pavilion. John laughs, because there are only 5 elders in the Heavenly Tower, and each of them is below the 11th step. John's father once said that the head of the Heavenly Pavilion was currently at the pinnacle of cultivation, and 1 step away from reaching the peak of martial arts. The initial stages of body hardening are followed by higher levels of cultivation, such as Kai Yuan, Qi Dong, Li He, Zhen Yuan, and Shen Yu. Each level is divided into 9 sub-levels. Each subsequent breakthrough will become more and more difficult. The number of Shan Yu level masters is too small. Thinking about this, Mason believes that it is better for him to focus on his development now. John says that the Ox Schoolmaster and the Thunder Schoolmaster are currently at the 7th or 6th stage of Shen Yu, and they are still far from being the heads of the Heavenly Pavilion. John's father said that 10 years ago, the clan leader reached the final stage of Shen Yu. But the brothers don't understand why he's not at his peak yet. John asks all the students present to promise that they will not reveal the secret that he knows. Everyone agrees not to tell anyone anything. Then John says that the head of the Heavenly Pavilion cannot reach the peak because of an incident that happened 10 years ago. The leader had no family, and he adopted 2 students. Both brothers were strong, smart, and talented. Each of them had a special character, and therefore the headmaster's approach to their training was also special. He always praised his older brother, but always treated his younger brother strictly. The younger brother distanced himself from the older one, trying to gain quick power, and darkness arose in his heart. Eventually, he mastered the forbidden technique that would terrify any master. After he learned this method, his character changed, and his power increased. When he had such great power, he expected to earn praise. But that night much blood was shed, and his adopted brother died, while his younger brother was able to escape punishment. Since then, the leader spent a lot of time in seclusion, and many already thought that he was not fit to lead the Heavenly Pavilion. But no one could have imagined that a few days later the leader himself would go after his student, capture him and imprison him in the flow of a writhing dragon. Mason remembered his meeting with the 11th elder right next to the writhing dragon. He told him about the business he had there. He realized that the 11th elder was the head of the Heavenly Pavilion, and he had come to visit his captive son. John says that it was because of these events that the leader was never able to break through to the top level. They just arrived at the market. Mason was amazed by the rows of goods he saw. John explains that each school has its own people, and points to the house where the representative of the Heavenly Pavilion is located. John says that this is his older sister's representative and warns Mason not to make any plans for her. John's sister has already reached the 3rd stage of Genuine, and of all the students in the schools, only a few can compare to her in strength. But Mason doesn't understand that if John's sister is so talented, then why he himself can't go through the stage of body hardening. John scratched his head and said that he wasn't very lucky, and of course he would train more. After all, he couldn't let Mason surpass him. John offered to introduce Mason to his sister, and together they headed to the Sky Pavilion residence. John walked up to this door and announced that he had arrived. A few seconds passed, and his sister allowed him to enter. The air in the room was heavier than usual. John walked closer to his sister, and with a speed that was incomprehensible to the eye, received a slap on the back of the head. John's sister's name was Becca. She asked John if he knew why she hit him, but he didn't answer. Then Becca said that it was because he allowed himself to be beaten. Becca said that he should train more, and if next time he allowed himself to be beaten, he would face her punishment. John, with a smile on his face, promised that he would not allow this to happen again. Becca looked at Mason and asked if he was the one who beat Lucas, to which he replied that he indeed did. John's sister knew everything very well, although Mason didn't understand how, because she spends many hours training in a closed room. Becca advised Mason to stay away from John, otherwise his development would be completely stopped. After that, she told them to leave the room because she needed to train. When they left, John said that his sister was kinder than he might have thought. Mason said with a smile on his face that everyone has their own path, although he did not respect John. They said goodbye, and Mason began walking around the market. Some of the stalls were not only for buying and selling all sorts of things. There were also stalls with alchemical materials and pills. Mason understood that special attention should be paid to tablets and herbs containing yang energy. For Mason, the prices here were enormous. One restoration pellet cost approximately 52 pieces of silver. These pellets were very useful for students who had reached the 7th and 9th steps. Mason was thinking about it when someone put a hand on his shoulder. He turned around to see Sansa greeting him with a smile. Mason asked rudely what she wanted. She replied kindly that she just wanted to say hello to him. Mason waved at her, turned around and began to walk away from her. Sansa was surprised. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, and she began to follow him at a short distance. Mason saw this, and after a while he couldn't take it anymore and stopped. He turned to Sansa and said that if she continued to pursue him, she could not expect leniency from him. She playfully asked if she would be punished like last time. Mason turned and walked over to one of the counters. There was a light yang stone on the merchant's counter, and Mason asked the merchant how much it cost. The merchant replied that it was not expensive at all, only 500 liang apiece. But this was beyond Mason's means, and he began to ask the merchant to lower the price. The merchant did not agree. Sansa followed the conversation. Mason looked around, and almost all the stalls were from the Bull School. Sansa approached Mason again and informed him that the shop belonged to her family, and immediately asked with a grin if he would like to receive these stones in exchange for one condition. Mason, of course, wanted to get these stones, but he could not do it because of his pride. He answered decisively no and offered the merchant an exchange. This market also allowed for exchange, so the turnover of herbs and granules was much higher. Mason handed the merchant a bottle of healing herbs that John had given him, and in return received 1 stone. The merchant also gave him grain as a gift, saying that he had not been able to sell it for a long time. Sansa was not happy that Mason did not agree to fulfill her wish. Mason didn't know what kind of seed it was, but since the seller gave it away for free, he gladly took it. Sansa continued to follow Mason, but he wanted to get rid of her. He was afraid of this girl's reputation. He thought that he would go into the thicket of the forest and scare her. Sansa followed him, but she didn't know where he was going. She understood that he wanted to get rid of her, and most likely he would scare her in the depths of the forest. A beaten Lucas watched them with his older brother. He told his older brother the story of the fight that had taken place, but in doing so he learned that Mason was just a homeless student on probation. There were only 10 of them in the Heavenly Clan, and Mason was one of them. They wanted to attack him, but they were afraid that someone else would see it. But the fact that Mason was walking into the thicket of the forest made their task much easier. They followed Mason and looked for an opportune moment to attack. Sansa was still following Mason, and he asked why she was doing this. Sansa asked to just take a walk with her. She asked if she wasn't beautiful, and if her body wasn't perfect. But Mason resolutely replied that he valued the girl's inner qualities, and that she had nothing to look at there. Sansa was angry. She was the daughter of the master of the Bull School, and Mason was just a probationary student. Many men would like to be with her. Mason's patience was at its limit when they suddenly heard a rustling sound in the bushes. Lucas came out from there with his older brother and said that they just wanted to get even with Mason and asked Sansa to move away. Sansa was worried about Mason and warned him that Lucas's older brother had reached the 5th stage of Kai Yuan. But they won't touch her because they fear her father, and Sansa offered to agree to her condition, and only then will he remain alive. But Mason was adamant. He refused Sansa, saying that they would see who would die and who would survive. Then Sansa stepped aside. Lucas's older brother asked Mason if he wanted to commit suicide because he shouldn't have been intruding into other people's conversations. Mason replied that if they wanted his life, they should try to take it themselves. He assumed a fighting stance and began to generate yang energy. Liquid yang is becoming more and more abundant. It was growing stronger because of the light yang stone he had bought, but the energy from that stone was exhausted in the blink of an eye. Two brothers rushed into battle. The elder struck first. They clashed fists, and the blow sent the elder flying, burning his hand. Lucas drew his sword and struck. But this time the sword did not pierce Mason's hands, but he caught it. Generating yang energy in his right hand, Mason touched Lucas's head, and he falls breathless to the ground. Now Lucas has got what he was looking for. He is dead. His older brother sees what has happened and rushes into battle again with the intention of killing Mason. This situation was different from when Mason helped John. Now the enemy wants to kill him, so he will not be merciful. The elder brother has already reached the 5th level of Kai Yuan, and Mason doesn't know if he has enough strength to use the same move against him. Each of Mason's attacks was accompanied by a huge stream of heat that burned through the elder brother's body. This was a fight of attrition. When one of them ran out of strength, he would lose. Sansa is amazed by Mason's strength. She has never seen warriors who can defeat an enemy head and shoulders above them. The elder is amazed. He doesn't understand why Mason is still not exhausted and where he gets such an incomparable amount of energy. From several precise blows, he flies back several meters, and realizing that he cannot win, he runs away, promising to avenge his brother Lucas. But Mason sees another drop of yang energy on his hand and throws it after him. A drop of energy pierces him through and through, and the older brother falls to the ground. Sansa is amazed at where Mason got such strength. She thought he was just a weakling, but now, Mason warned Sansa to remain still while he examined the corpses of his defeated rivals. He found some pieces of silver and some medicine, thinking that they could be sold profitably. Sansa, frightened, said that if Mason needed money, she could give it to him if he didn't kill her. But Mason said that he was not a bandit, and if he didn't have enough money, he would earn it. He called Sansa to him. He warned her that if she was obedient, he would not do anything to her. Mason took the body of the elder brother on his shoulder and ordered Sansa to carry Lucas's body. Even though they were deep in the forest, there was still a chance of meeting hunters or someone else. Mason wanted to hide the bodies and was wondering how to make sure Sansa wouldn't tell anyone. They approached the river. Mason found 2 stones and told her to tie one of them to the body of the deceased, which Sansa obediently did. Mason threw both bodies further into the river. He told Sansa that she was now his accomplice, but this only amused her. This time, the enemies themselves provoked the fight, and Mason did not want to kill them. Sansa asked him if he had killed before. Mason replied that he did not, but she did not believe him, as his blows were perfectly practiced. They walked further along the river. Mason quickly took off his clothes and jumped into the water to wash off the stains of the fight. Afterwards, he lay down on the stone, and Sansa also bathed in the river. When she came out of the water, her body was practically naked, and she sat down on a rock next to Mason. He hardly looked at her, but simply lay on the stone. Sansa admitted that although she was beautiful, she had never had anything with men, and Mason was the first one who touched her. She admitted that she was acting this way only to attract capable people to her side, to inflame the relations between the disciples of the Heavenly Pavilion and the Thunder House. But Mason rudely replied that it was none of his business. They got dressed, and Sansa said that she would no longer get under his feet. After which they parted. Mason sat on the edge of the rift by the stream of the writhing dragon and meditated. He used up 2 drops of liquid yang in that fight, so he should return to training. Mason never figured out where the 3rd drop of liquid yang he had went. He took out of his pocket the seed that the merchant had given him. The seed absorbed a drop of energy and emitted a red glow. He decided to plant the seed in the ground to see what would come of it.